Welcome to Women's Sports Weekly, where women's sports happen every day, but we talk about it once a week. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Carolyn. Women's Sports Weekly is a podcast where we discuss the latest news, explore interesting stories, and share our love for women's sports. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at WomensSportsWeeklyPod. Follow us and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Send us an email at womensportsweeklypod@gmail.com, and we may feature your email on the Listener Experience Zone, the Les. Today we have a very special interview with Thayer Lavielle, who is the managing director of the collective at The Team, where she leads the agency's practice focused on advancing women in sports. The Team is a marketing and talent management company based in LA, and Thayer joins us today to talk investment and fandom in women's sports. She provides some really great insights on the business side of women's sports, and we are so excited to share it with you today. But before we do, let's get into some updates from us.
Starting with Run Club. We have Run Club this Thursday and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time here in Denver at the 99ers Sports Bar. Each week, if you listen to our podcast, we share a secret word. And if you share that secret word with the bartenders after a run, you will get 50% off your first draft. The secret word this week is team.
Let's also take a moment to ask you to please rate and subscribe to our podcast. We create, produce, and edit the podcast ourselves. So if you want to support us, rate, subscribe, give us a positive review, and share with people you love. Thank you to everyone who has rated the podcast so far. If you send us a screenshot of your 5-star rating, we will send you a Women's Sports Weekly sticker for free in the mail. All right, let's get into our interview. Thayer Lavielle is managing director of the collective at The Team, where she leads the agency's practice focused on advancing women in sports, entertainment, and music. Since launching the collective in 2019, she has grown it into a multi-million-dollar business and helped create 2 industry-first platforms for women's sports, the Collective Think Tank and the Collective Marketplace. Before leading the collective, Thayer oversaw talent marketing and operations for the team's women's coaching and broadcast divisions, helping athletes and talent build meaningful brand partnerships. Across her career, she has negotiated more than $250 million in sports and entertainment deals and worked with major brands. Thayer was recognized as a 2019 Sports Business Journal Game Changer and received multiple honors for leadership and DEI advocacy in sports business. Welcome to the show, Thayer. We are so excited to have you and have so much to talk about, so let's get into it.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation.
So we are going to get into investment first. We have a lot of questions for you, and I'm going to read back some of your research, mostly because I think it's really important for our listeners to hear, and then would love for you to expand on it and get your thoughts. Revenue from women's sports grew 4.5 times faster than that of men's sports between 2022 and 2024. But it's estimated that the women's sports market makes up only 2% of the $75 billion of revenue generated in 2024. Can you talk to us a little bit about how women's sports are valued and how that valuation has changed over time?
Yeah, thanks for leading off with a real softball.
We're getting right into it.
Listen, I mean, I think what's super fascinating just about women's sports right now is that like 5 years ago, nobody would have debated this conversation. It would have been like, was there enough demand? And here we are really talking about infrastructure and scale and how we're valuing things. You know, the great news is actually for all of women's sports across the globe, because we look at it really globally, is that there are now billionaires with a B investing in women's sports, which means that they are not looking at it as something that's a nice to have. It's actually a real investment vehicle for them and underpriced and undervalued assets, which is very cool. The way that we've looked at valuing this, and we did this, I think you're referring to the report we did with RBC, the New Economy of Sport, and we went in, and what we argue is that, and we argue this across a lot of different elements of the women's versus men's games, is that you can't at this point in time hold those things up as equal, because number one, women's sports just hasn't had the length of runway that men's have enjoyed across the decades, if not century of time. The second piece of it is that therefore the infrastructure around those leagues has been incredibly different and has had to build itself Lego by Lego. Now, there's a lot of benefits to that as well, which means that we are in a digital first economy now. We are scaling way faster. Women's sports is scaling way faster than men's sports was at their points in time similarly. So I would say that the way that we have looked at this valuation across club and league valuations has been across 40 different variables. And these 40 different variables are everything from what does the market look like in that city or that league itself? What is the team operating on in terms of what's their front office like how are they coupled with a men's team, down to do they have separate sales teams for tickets, like all of the different, really getting down into variables, because when you get into and you split these variables apart into 40 different measures, you can start to play with levers differently and start to plus up where it's appropriate, not falsely, but you can start to say, well, maybe that might be a little bit higher, or maybe this media valuation could go a little bit higher. So we feel like there's a lot of opportunity to look positively on setting up a great investment story, which is really what we've been focused on for the last 7 years across the collective.
So we see a lot of times, Danielle and I, access to women's sports as one of the biggest barriers for investment and people watching and buying in. For example, like not being able to watch games. When Danielle and I first started to watch the WNBA, we had to go into like the black market of the internet to find the games. We've been to games before where they're not selling the merch. There's no merch online. There's no goalie merch online. We see it shifting, but how do we get networks who purchase the broadcast rights and team executives on board to provide what we're asking for?
I think it comes down to setting up the economic story. And I do think that they see it now. And I think they're starting to see it across every sport and every new league that's coming out. You're looking at the PWHL and its third season coming around with a 10-game TV deal. You're seeing that based on the fact that not only are people stuffing the venues to the rafters for their regular season games, but they're also going on this takeover tours, and people are stuffing to the rafters on those as well. So it's like all of a sudden broadcast says, hold on a second, how can we actually give the people what they want and see if there's something here? So there's been testing and learning, I think, over the past 5-7 years on this. I would say that it's in a great place. I mean, ESPNW now has Women's Sports Sundays. Just Women's Sports has been in existence as long as the collective, and really came out and said, we're just going to dedicate a singular spot for you to find out exactly to answer that question. Where am I going to see this? It was not always shown, and it is still not always shown. You can't necessarily find volleyball on TV. You find PWHL only on certain channels or streamers. And so I think what we're demanding of the system is to be equal to or equitable to a men's game, which has been in existence far longer than we have. And we have to have patience and prove out this business model bit by bit by bit. Just because we believe it's there doesn't mean that the return has been there. So we have to keep pushing this investment story and growth story and ROI story time and time again. And that is like yeoman's work and exhausting and laborious, but ultimately that's what's going to pay off. And that's what's driving these big investors into the game, is that it is being proven.
You made a distinction between equal and equitable. Can you talk more about that?
I go back to this kind of runway, this time frame. Like, why would we be equal at this time? When you look at the NBA versus the WNBA, the NBA has 50 years on the WNBA. So I don't think anybody's thinking, well, we should be equal to them. And the players have said, we're not looking to be paid equally. I mean, ideally, that would be lovely, but also it's a business model that needs to work. We want equitable chances to be able to start from a place, to have the same types of opportunities, to be able to gain at the same level and rate, and to not have to feel like we're constantly crawling out of a hole. I'm not saying that that's what the players felt like at the WNBA, but I am saying that with the pace of acceleration on sponsorship dollars being infused into the system, with media dollars being turned on, with fans being turned on, it is very clear that women's sports is an ecosystem that has arrived, is here to stay. It is not a moment in time. It's not these big moments, major athletes, Olympic spikes. It's really institutional. Cities are building facilities around this. Brands are creating long-term strategies. I mean, Aflac just did a 7-year deal with the Atlanta NWSL team. Media companies are programming year-round around this Tons and tons of podcasts are coming up just around women's sports. As you guys well know, youth athletes are now able to see and project themselves into a space where they've never been able to see themselves before. And that perpetuates more of this. And so this has never really been in play before. And so to be able to see it unfold so quickly is super exciting. So the pace has been great, but it doesn't mean that it should be equal to men's just because we're moving so quickly. Because men's has been here proving this out for 15, 20, 40, 50, 100 years in some sports.
And it's definitely something brought up a lot, but I think some people forget as well. You did mention something about brands, and you mentioned Aflac. Curious, we know women's sports fans are more likely to support the brands that support their teams. Mm-hmm. So what other brands are engaging with women's sports fans and doing it well?
I look across a couple different ecosystems for this. I think a lot of brands are doing it really well, to be totally fair. I think people like Ally are just kind of a standard bearer for how brands can be courageous to invest in media and make a declaration to say, no, this is super important to us and we're going to invest 50-50. And the fact that they reached their pledge a year early only shows, kind of to our point, like the acceleration of the ecosystem. The thing with women's sports that I think we have to acknowledge is that it's often tied to how girls in youth sports come up, right? And there is a propensity for girls to not engage in youth sports past a certain age because life, whatever the factors are, they start to menstruate, they don't feel that good. Youth sports is now oftentimes you're very focused and on a one-track thing, and if I'm not the best, then should I be doing it? And there are boys, and maybe I can't get there on time, or I don't have a ride, or whatever the barriers are or the friction points. So there's that, those pieces to it. But what happens is the ecosystem has to build towards that. And so what I mean by that is brands are really the accelerators of growth for this and for growth within women's sports. And that comes from supporting the entire ecosystem. Dove is doing enormous programs around particularly women's soccer around the world, but they're looking at it from how do we invest in body confidence and making sure girls know it's just okay to play and be on the rec team and not the academy team in your local market. And by the way, mom, it's okay to figure out how to go coach your daughter even though you never played this game before. And so they're really looking at it holistically as to how to give women and girls confidence to stay in this game and to stay and participate in it, even if you're not the best and it's not Instagrammable and it's not all of these great things. Just go do that. Heineken looks at it from a really cool place of this watch economy and this pub economy. They're really looking at how do you actually encourage men and women to start to watch women's sports across different geographies, basically. They'll even go so far as to play off of the superstitions and replicate women fans. I think it might have been Champions League, but they'll literally pull up and make a direct replica of a very specific team's fan base, where they gather to watch every game. And they pulled it and replicated it in the new market where the tournament was happening in order to give these fans the exact same experience, because sports fans are so superstitious. So just fun ways to play around how women's sports is competitive. They're really fun to watch and fans know that. And so all of a sudden sponsors are saying, how do we do this? Gatorade, they've been invested in athletes and this athlete journey from youth to pro to motherhood to all of these things. There's endless amounts of them. Sephora, Charlotte Tilbury, Elf, you look at Nationwide, you look at in the NWSL and really looking at how people are giving back in their communities, and they do that across men's sports and women's sports, or AT&T and their storytelling around women's sports. I feel like there's a lot of brands that are activating incredibly well and in ways that are equal parts. How do we contribute to the broader system to how do we actually, do well for our brand?
Those are some great examples. So there has been so much growth, and I know that women's sports fans who have been here from the beginning, there's some protectiveness over the growth and feeling of am I going to get left behind? You've made a great point of women's sports is not where men's sports is. And I think some women's sports fans would argue we don't want to be like them. So can you talk about how women's sports can grow in a way that still honors the fans who were there from the beginning, but also operate in this world of capitalism and make money for the players and the teams and the owners.
I love this topic because I do feel like women's sports fans who have been there from the get-go should be honored and seen. And by the way, they're very different in WNBA than they are in women's soccer, than they are in volleyball, because they're literally this grassroots fan base, men and women that are there. They're also often groups that have felt unseen or underappreciated and not included in other sports ecosystems. It's kind of like music, actually, where they really feel like it's an inclusive environment based on what sport they're in and who they're following. I think that that is the key actually for investors to really be mindful of, because at its core, I would assume that these fan bases actually do want to make sure that their sport or their team is growing, right? Of course we do. That's why we're in it. But you also want to be recognized as we were first adopters. We were here first. To what end? I'm not really sure. I think to be able to hold that sport or that team to be a cherished commodity is something that the brands and the teams as they grow and the leagues as they grow really need to work to consider how to keep that magic. I don't know what the answer is there. And I think each team has its own magic, but I do feel like brands can certainly help to create that. But on the other hand, change happens. We are here, and this is what everybody has dreamed of and what we've all pushed for. So we also have to step back and go, this is going to be different. I just hope that we can continue to feel seen and heard and continue to perpetuate this incredible community of inclusion that we've, co-developed. I'm not sure we'll get there by closing everybody off, though.
So switching gears a little bit to talk more about infrastructure development. Venue naming rights can serve as a large investment into women's teams, and also having an exclusive team venue can create a better fan experience. Across all women's sports, we see teams playing in venues that are not technically theirs. Can you talk more about the value of having a space for the women's team and how it serves as a large revenue source?
Yeah, a team that has its own stadium is one that can craft its own destiny. It is a place where you can not only build your own story from a revenue and sponsorship perspective, because you can really determine how, if you're building it from the ground up, how you want that to be set up for your fan base, which I very much would argue that women fans, and that's not to say that only fans of women's sports are women, but women fans in particular fan differently than men. We have less time to do it. We do 2.5 hours a day of more just unseen labor. And so how can venues actually see that and recognize that and set up the entire experience for success for women? Period. End of story. That is also carries through to women executives, front office, coaches, trainers. We're all juggling a lot of things in our life, and players, right? And so it's not just about making sure that we have the right trainers for the right training at the right time of the month, and the knees and the this and the that, or the right size showers for super tall people, or whatever the things are. But it's also about crafting, and back to the fan question, crafting this experience that these fans feel like that was so much fun, and I feel like that was worth every penny for me to go and spend not only my money, but my time. And now I'm excited because I'm also bringing my friends, and I'm also bringing my family, and we're all turning into big fans. It's very hard to do that when you don't control your destiny and you don't control the naming rights, because you can't go sell a separate competitive partner to the naming rights because they can't be seen in the same thing, or the venue has this water brand and it's sold through the men's team and we want this water brand. Nope, can't do it. And so it limits revenue opportunity, it limits partner opportunity, and it certainly makes, I think, women's teams get super creative on how they're doing sponsorships and whether that comes through talent then or what, but it's always better, I think, to be able to craft your own destiny. Now, that being said, those are huge infrastructure investments, and going back to the idea of like, this is a business, it really needs to work for the city, it needs to work for the team owners, it needs to work in order to make sure that these costs are amortized over a time where the city will continue to grow around that team or teams.
Those are all such great points.
It was something that I hadn't thought of until I was diving into the team's research more, of like, oh yeah, just the fact of having a brand come and slap their name on the side of your stadium creates so much money for you.
Yeah, when you're thinking of these naming rights deals, it's hundreds of millions of dollars in many cases across many, many years. And the longer the deals for these teams, it just signals to other investors like, we're in it and this is here to stay. We're signed up for 7, 10, 15 years at this stadium doing this thing because we believe in this city and in this team and in what these owners are building, which that's a wildly exciting proposition. And then it really also signals to the constituents that live in those markets like, hey, this team is worthy of our time and investment as well, because we're seeing other people that are starting to grow and put money into potentially venues and practice facilities and things like that.
We're going to get into a little bit more of the fandom now. The Gender Equity Policy Institute reports women have about 13% less free time than men in the U.S. So what are ways that we can appeal to women's sports fans without taking a ton of their time? If they have less, how do we appeal to them when they might not have time to go to the stadium?
This is a huge passion conversation for me because as a woman fan of sports, men's and women's, I would watch anything like horseshoes or whatever. And I'm a mom and I have a full life and I work, and like so many of us out there. And even if you don't have kids, we have less time and 2.5 hours of the kind of unseen labor. And as I jokingly say, you're welcome for the toilet paper and toothpaste, everybody, because it never runs out. And that's really, I think, something that inherently fandom has been male-centered over many, many years. And so when it's male-centered, there's this mentality or lack of creativity, I think, in how to actually stop and look at and analyze who are our women fans, how do we best serve her? And by the way, we're not a monolith. We're all different from each other. And even though you two are super close, you're different from each other. And so how can a venue understand who you are, down to what you're spending, why you're spending it, how you're spending your time, the types of things you're focused on versus what Danielle is focused on? How can you guys think about, how can these venues think about the experience if you're taking kids there? Like, hey, I'm going with my kids and I want to make sure that we're all having a great time and that there's good food and that we're entertained from the minute we line up to the minute we leave. And that I don't feel like I've been gouged and I don't feel like I'm only feeding them cotton candy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that there are other options, because we're only as happy as our least happy child, truly. So make this experience awesome for parents, particularly moms. And then if you're just going with friends, make that particularly fun. So what is that night out feel like, or that day out feel like? Is there a DJ? Are there different types of options for beverages and food and seating arrangements? We have lots of ideas. The other thing is that I would say it's even more so is out of venue. How do you do this out of a venue? How do you actually capitalize on my fandom of New England sports teams? I don't live in the market and I want to engage. And so what are the opportunities for them to capitalize on my fandom here? Or if I just have other things to do, like I don't have 4 hours to go sit down and watch a football game. Like I don't. And it's the same way I don't have 4 hours every week to go play golf. That's a once in a while thing. And so how can we get smarter about engaging her in a way that really understands who I am is different than you are, Carolyn, is different than you are, Danielle. So that is what we really focus on, is like, we know that we're different. We know that we're avid sports fans. 72% of us across the world are avid sports fans. A quarter of those think it's one of the most important things in their life, and yet we don't have time. And we have all the disposable income, right? We're like literally running the table on the economy, and yet nothing is changing. And so I would argue that general operators, teams, leagues, et cetera, across men's and women's sports need to go from this ticket, I got to sell the tickets, fill the stadium, get the thing, blah, 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 to like, how do you actually become a fan engagement company first and foremost? Like it has to be the whole surround sound for that family to really succeed and that woman to really succeed in her fandom. That is a huge shift in mentality that will take some time to be able to test and learn with and prove out, but that's what we're here for.
It's interesting because more men than women are women's sports fans. 63% of women's sports fans are men, but as you said, women make the buying decisions in the home. And so how do we balance getting more women interested in engaging with women's sports? And then how are we also marketing to the men who are there, who are engaging?
Two different questions. I think if you are a man and a women's sport fan, you're as individualized as the women that are there, right? So it's not like all men are monoliths either. And they're in it because they passionately feel that women's sports is super competitive to watch, very fun, pure. I often hear like, it's just a pure version of the game, whatever sport that is. And so they're in it for potentially more competitive reasons, but they're also there because it feels inclusive, and that's the vibe that they're looking for. That particular fan may not necessarily be like, they may be more of somebody who wants to feel like we're in a community. We're watching this as a community, and I don't need to necessarily paint my face. I don't know. I'm not sure what. It depends on, I guess, where we are in the season and how far along in the playoffs, right? To try to get more women in, I don't know if that's the goal, or if it's because I feel like that's trying to prove credibility to something that people just may not either have time or interest. So are there ways that you could probably get more top of the funnel interest because teams and leagues are putting out different social media or brand campaigns that might attract the attention of a woman who may just not even be aware of women's sports, or that, I know that women play basketball, but do I need to watch that? Because I'm already busy watching the teams that I grew up with, which weren't women's basketball, right? And so, again, going back to this kind of time obligation, like you're fighting against a lot of different factors of her time and wallet, and it's not necessarily just other sports, or it's her job, it's juggling a million things. And so I think it's how can you use brands to be able to get out as far and wide as we possibly can.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I want to actually get into these 3 types of fans that you all have identified through your research. And so they're ISO fans. And I'm reading back your research to you.
I love it. But I was like, which one are we talking about? Yeah, I love it. So good.
So ISO fans who tend to, I've heard you mention, they kind of lurk. They do it on their own. You have duo fans who like to do it together, which I think is how Danielle and I, when we started dating, we became duo fans. Like, we're going to do this together. It's a thing that we share together. And then social fans. Social fans are fans who like to do it in community. And I want to say this because I think social fans has grown so much, especially with the rise of women's sports bars. I can go into a women's sports bar now and turn to the table next to me and just talk about the game that's on. And that I could never do that before. Where the problem lies in women's sports is that ISO fans continue to be more prevalent in women's sports than in men's. The average across the PWHL, WNBA, and NWSL is 18%, and it's a lot lower among men's sports. I would love to hear your perspective on, are we trying to target the ISO fans and make them duo? Should we be focused on the duo fans and make them social? Because we know that if they're in the duo or social fan base, they're more likely to invest. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and what should be the strategy there?
Yeah, we loved this study, and this was done by Risa Izard she was an assistant professor at UConn and was then a graduate or like a PhD student, I think, at UMass at the time, and now is at Parity leading their research. So she's super smart, and we love everything she comes out with wherever she is. And Parity does such great research also. This study was so interesting for us because what it really did was look at how fans are fanning around women's sports and how are they specifically thinking about the acceptability of being a fan, if you will, and what's really feeling clear on it. So I don't know if it's necessarily moving ISO fans to social fans. I don't think that's necessarily the move. I think the move is to make sure that ISO fans feel so comfortable being ISO fans that they're investing in the system. Because again, we're competing with everybody's time, men or women. And so how do we actually ensure that we have an opportunity to provide everybody where they want to be, the experience that they want? And so for us, it was less about how do we move them and how do we engage them differently. It was more, which I think is, by the way, up to the leagues to be able to dive into those stats, because I think it was the WNBA went down significantly over time, which is where they started with this original study was like, oh, well, hold on a second. In the 5 years since we looked at this, literally the entire world has changed for women's sports. So let's go dive back in. And lo and behold, a lot of those fans moved into a different category. So I think that will happen naturally. I don't think it's necessarily a forced thing. I do think we'll take those ISO fans all day long because we want them lurking. We want them buying the keychain or being like, did you guys watch that WNBA game? Or even just being able to say is there a community for me to watch NWSL? Or I didn't know that I liked women's volleyball so much. So I kind of feel like we'll take you however you come in and know that the product that's on the field of play is so good that they'll stick around. And then eventually they might actually have the courage to go with somebody else. But I even think that study today, I think the speed at which this industry is moving is going so quickly that that's probably even different today, 2 years later.
I know for us, we meet so many people who are like, I never played basketball, or I don't even know much about basketball still, but I just love watching, and it's because a friend introduced it to them, or everyone around them was watching and getting excited, and they're like, what am I missing out on? So I definitely think there's a lot of power in that.
Agreed. I'm constantly struck by working in the space. I'm sure you guys agree with this. Like working in the space, it just feels like so much momentum and so much great growth and so many great things and so many proof points of infrastructure and investment and all of these things. And then I go to the internet and I'm like, wow, when people talk about, when they pose questions around sports, it's only the big four men's teams or leagues. And I'm like, really? Not even a consideration set in there? So it makes me crazy. But we're going to keep going.
I also think it's interesting. We've also met a lot of fans who are like, I'm here for the drama. I love the WNBA because I love to know who's dating, and it's gotten me into the sport. But I think women's fans especially, they like to have a lot of access. And I know for me too, it's why we got into the podcast. I love to tell the story and to have all the context. So can you talk a little bit about how to balance that? Because I do feel like women are asked to do a lot more marketing, a lot more of sharing of their daily life. And they do it incredibly well. So they use it to their advantage. And also, like, if you don't want to do that, if you want to be more of like, I want to just show up and play the sport that I was destined to play, how do we manage that as like what we ask for from our athletes?
I think there's a lot of ways to answer that, because the recent CBA, for example, that is exactly who they're trying to serve, are the people like, hey, let's just get baseline to baseline so I can just go ball if I want to ball, right? Now, I would argue in the history of women's sports in the last 8 years, just taking that, because women have been playing unbelievable sports for long before that and long before any of us were born, that when the pandemic happened and we were all sitting at home, stuck on our phones, there wasn't a lot to look at. And guess who we saw repeatedly were women athletes, because they had learned how to lean in and use social media long before any of us actually understood that, because we were not there. We weren't living on our phones. And so we were all of a sudden turned on to, what does April Ross eat for dinner? And how does she stay so fit? Or how does Alex Morgan, juggle all of her life, or whatever the things are. And so we became curious about the humanity of these women. And that in turn helped us then, when women's sports came back online, first, might I add, Kathy Engelbert did the first virtual draft, not the NFL, as a brand new commissioner, by the way. Props to her. She'll tell the story of like literally having her kids steaming the jerseys and handing them to her. And she's like on the job for 2 months or something, or 3 months. It was crazy. And then we had the She Believes Cup, but like there was a bubble in July, and then we had the Wubble and the NBA bubble. And so like women really led, and it was the year of George Floyd. And so there was an enormous amount of social justice stuff going on, and the women led there. And so it was a place, this digital and social ecosystem, where women were very, very comfortable, and not as many male athletes needed to be, candidly. So we did a study with RBC coming out of that saying, well, what is the value of that? Right? So what is that value? Well, it turns out they're 2 times as engaging, even though at that point they made 21 times less on the field of play. They had to go make up 82% of their income off the field of play. And so where do they go? Let me build my follower base and my fan base, which builds loyalty, which builds interaction and engagement. So therefore, as a brand, now I'm a brand, I am able to capitalize on that for myself. So where the NBA has become this like massive cultural property now, there are incredible matchups and rivalries and great stories and beefs and all this stuff that we tune in for the competition. But there's also fashion and creator economy and celebrity ecosystems that are being built around this, which is super fun to watch. But it's really this social virality that has pushed, I think, a lot of these sports forward. And now you're seeing that trickle down into NIL, and now you're seeing that trickle down into like collegiate, even high school, for men and women. They're all cluing in like, oh, if I can really tap in and perfect this system, I can make a lot more money individually. Now, I have all sorts of opinions about what that means, but we won't go there today. But I would say that sponsors and like partners really finally are starting to understand this audience through that. So they're really fully able to capitalize on maximizing what these women athletes have built.
It is a conversation, like especially as NIL continues, of what does that look like in the future. So maybe we'll have to have you back on and like really deep dive into that one time.
I have some great other people that would be better for that, but
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a system that's necessarily set up for women athletes.
For sure.
To be maximized, but
You've been quoted as saying equity will not happen by momentum. It will only happen by design, and I love that. The research the team accomplishes and shares is just amazing, and like I said, I've just loved diving into it these past couple weeks. So what is the team exploring next? What are you passionate about looking forward? What else do we need to know?
I'm excited to tell you about a couple things. One is we just came out with this one in the end of February, March timeframe, which was around the NCAA. So there's a long-held report called the Acosta-Carpenter Report, which basically over 40 years went in, almost 40 years went in, and every 2 years would count how many women athletes there are, how many women coaches, how many assistant coaches, how many women's sports programs, right? How are those counted? How are those counted across the entire NCAA ecosystem from, soup to nuts? They paused that, the two women that had led that, because I think 40 years was probably they were tired. But we have a think tank. The collective has the collective think tank made up of 25 schools around the world, and 5 different professors from 5 different schools came together and said, how do we actually pick this back up and do this again? And so we published those findings from 2024, and it's amazing in that we've seen incredible progress over the years of how many athletes and coaches, et cetera. But we've seen a decline in women coaches, particularly among women's sports. We've seen very much a stagnation of the number of women athletes participating, which is a little bit of an alarm bell because, wow, look at all these professional sports that are building up. And yet in the collegiate ecosystem, it's like the same amount of women participating. So that's something that I think is requiring us diving in. We have a couple other things coming up later in the fall. One is around girls flag football and what some of the benefits are of that and what we're seeing. And that's done from somebody within the collective ecosystem. And then we have some sport romance research coming out. This is a huge passion point for a lot of women readers who are not fans of sport. Full stop. Pulling
Heated rivalry. We love it.
Heated rivalry, but it goes way beyond that.
Yep.
And how many new fans this genre is bringing in is pretty cool. And then really our big thing is that the collective is launching in music because guess what? Oh my gosh, women need investment in music. What? And this study will really look at women fans of live music.
That's great. I have so many questions because I'm like, there's a whole Title IX piece that's happening within NCAA, and we've done a deep dive on Title IX before, and the way that is enforced or the lack of enforcement and all of that, I think contributes to so many of the things that you're speaking about. So we'll be on the lookout for anything that the team puts out. It's really, really great research.
I appreciate the compliment. It's hard work by many different people across our ecosystem, internal and external. And so we're just appreciative of people engaging with it and honestly hope it serves the broader industry just to continue to try to convince people to put more money in.
And then something we like to ask everyone that comes on the show is, who is your favorite athlete in women's sports and why?
Oh, gosh.
Past, present, or future?
Past, present, or future. Can I have 2?
Of course.
Okay, so I'm going to say just from my childhood, I would say my mom, because my mom is a woman who had 4 kids by the time she was 26, decided to go back to college. We lived in Providence, Rhode Island, went to Brown because as one does with 4 kids at 26 or whatever she was, probably 28, and decided I also think I want to play lacrosse. And so she went off and started to play lacrosse and obviously made the team and was all New England at like 30. And I was 4 and remember going kind of being babysat at her practices by other teammates and stuff. So she would be one because she really just said, and I have a lot of older brothers, she was like, you can do anything, you can do anything. And she just constantly led that path for me. I would say her. I would say I don't want to pick a favorite in this one, because we have so many on our own roster, but there are so many impressive women athletes to just watch, from the collegiate space to professional space to even high school space. My daughter is an incredible athlete. She's a flag football player, but she's also just an incredible human. And I think that is what playing sports for women does, is it just develops you in so many ways that requires you to lead, basically. So I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to pick a favorite other than my daughter and my mom.
We asked Ryan Rucco, and he was like, I'm not doing this. This is a trap.
Yeah, it is. It is.
When you represent so many of the athletes, like, I understand that. But thank you for sharing.
I have my favorites from a personality perspective, but even that I'll be quiet on.
Thank you for sharing about your mom and your daughter. Your mom sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So.
She is. Both are amazing. Yes.
Where can people follow and support the work you do?
So we have an incredible newsletter, actually. If you go to wearethecollective.com, All of our research is there. We publish it for free every time because we want everybody to be smart. You can sign up for our newsletter there. And then we have a presence on X and Instagram. And then obviously LinkedIn. You can follow me or follow the team. And yeah, you guys are doing great work. And I'm so appreciative of the messages that you bring out and the guests that you have on. Your podcast is really well done.
Thank you. We're trying.
You're doing great.
We're trying.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thayer, for joining us. That wraps up our interview for today. Be sure to follow all of the great work Thayer is doing with the Collective team on Instagram at @the_team_collective. And the website Thayer mentioned, again, is www.wearethecollective.com. That's it for this week. We will see you next week on Women's Sports Weekly. In the meantime, watch women's sports, rate and subscribe to the pod on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, and share the podcast with your friends. Thanks for joining us.